Hello and welcome to the National Railway Museum podcast, where we dive into some of the more complicated and fascinating stories in our collection with an expert guest who can help us explore all different aspects of that. My guest today is Paul Bickley. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. Yeah, thank you for that nice welcome. I'm Paul Bickley. I'm the current curator of the Crime Museum, which is based at New Scotland Yard. It is a police training museum. I focus on educating young police officers, looking at how crimes were solved in the past. I was a police officer for 31 years, so I've got a lot of police background, including 9 years working on the flying squad, so investigating armed robbery. We don't pay police wages to run a museum, so I retired. I'm now a member of police staff, so I've now got the wonderful job of being the curator of the Crime Museum.
I mean, I can sympathise on the point of museum salaries as well. But I think the other thing we wanted to point out is that we're really lucky to have you, because this is not a museum that's open to the public, is it? This is a closed museum.
No, it's very much a training museum. We don't invite the public in, mainly because it is used for training, so we haven't got the capacity to invite the public in. But out of respect for the victims and the family members, we don't involve the public as well. We have a drugs licence, which is conditional, but it's not open to the public, and we have firearms. There's lots of things, good reasons why we don't involve the public.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fascinating collection, and one of the things that the thing you're here to talk to us today about is this long relationship that the railways have with crime and with policing, and we're going to do it, I think, through two key cases that are almost 100 years apart. We were talking about just how
so close.
So close. The first of these happens in 1864, so we're not right at the start of the railway age, but it's still quite a new technology. And one of the key things I suppose we'll see in the case is that both the public and the police are still trying to find their way around how you police this technology and the new spaces created by it. Do you want to introduce the case?
Yeah, I mean, you say railways are new. Policing was new. The Met wasn't set up until 1829, so we were still quite a new force. And the officers at that time didn't have DNA, didn't have fingerprints, CCTV. So some great work. And there are some very famous Scotland Yard detectives because of the great way they worked and the cases they solved. This case is the murder of a man called Thomas Briggs. It took place on the 9th of July, 1864. And Thomas Briggs is a very wealthy businessman. Strangely, he was working on a Saturday. He finished work at about 3 p.m. and then he went to visit his niece in Peckham. He was on his way home and got on a train at Fenchurch Street train station in London and was travelling home to Hackney Wick. Got on at 8:45. When the train arrived at Hackney Wick, he was no longer on the train. Two members of the public went to get in the train, and there was clearly signs of a disturbance. There was blood on the seats, there was blood on the windows, on the doors. So they alerted the guard, a man called Benjamin Ames. Today's date, we would expect that crime scene to be sealed off, and so we can preserve evidence. Ben, he's the guard. His main aim is to make sure the train runs on time. So he locks the door, gets the train on its way. It only makes it into the siding at the end of its journey.
Okay.
So we've got no victim. The victim, Thomas Briggs, he is found on a railway line. He's found by a train going in the opposite direction. The train driver, seeing this bundle on the track, stops and gets his engineer to go and see what it is. He finds Thomas Briggs seriously injured, and he dies a short while later without really regaining consciousness. So he can't really tell us anything. So we've got these two incidents, and they're very quickly linked. And Scotland Yard detective, Inspector Richard Tanner, is sent to take up the inquiry. So he'll go to the crime scene. What has he got? There's no witnesses. It's a sealed first-class carriage. There's no CCTV. There's no DNA. No cell site analysis that we'd look for today as well. The only thing you can really work with is the victim. And it's very interesting to know as much as you can about your victim in a murder inquiry. Now, Thomas Briggs, very wealthy businessman, always known to have a very fancy watch and chain. This is missing. It's been ripped from his waistcoat. The link is still on the waistcoat, but the watch and chain is missing. He'd always wear a very fancy silk top hat. This is also missing. In the carriage, there is a top hat, but not of the standard as worn by gentlemen, definitely not Mr. Briggs's hat. Also, there's his walking stick. So all Richard Tanner can do is to make inquiries with the local second-hand shops, jewellers, to see if anyone has seen this watch and chain. A jeweller, very aptly named Mr. Death. He says he's had a
wonderful Victorian name, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mr. Death.
We're talking about murder, and the jeweller is called Mr. Death. Yeah. You couldn't make it up. He said 2 days after the murder on the 11th of July, he had a man come into his shop with that watch and chain. He's adamant he is the watch and chain. He's now switched that for another chain. He's still got the watch, but he's changed the chain for a smaller, modern chain, lighter in weight. Describes him as being white, about 30, blonde hair, clear complexion, and he spoke with a Swiss or German accent. So we've got our first real lead. Richard Tanner, he also circulates the description of the hat that's left in the carriage to see if that was going to assist at all. And to assist with the investigation, they advertise a reward, £200 reward.
This is quite a lot of money in the 1860s, isn't it? £200, not to be sniffed at as a reward.
Probably the average salary for that year, the annual
Amazing.
salary.
Yeah.
So yeah, a year's wages for this bit of information. Not surprisingly, it brought forward Jonathan Matthews. And he said, that hat you've got there belongs to Franz Muller. And you could even tell us it was made by T.H. Walker, which was confirmed inside the hat. He said, Muller is a German tailor. His description matches that as given by the jeweller. But he says, yeah, it's a German accent. He said that Muller actually came to his house to see his wife on the 11th of July, so the same day as he got the chain. We spoke to Mrs. Matthews. She said he turned up and he showed me this nice new chain he'd got. And he also had a jewellery box from Mr. Death's jewellers, which he gave to Mr. Matthews, his daughter.
Yeah.
So good corroboration. Mrs. Matthews, she's big on fashion. She said he was wearing a very fancy silk top hat, the type worn by gentlemen. And so lots of things to link Muller to the suspect. So we find out that Muller actually lives in Bow, East London, very close to where Mr. Briggs's body had been thrown from the train. So Richard Tanner rushes to the scene, the address, to go and arrest Franz Muller. But when he got there, he found Muller had fled. He'd gone to the London docks and he was now on a sailing ship heading to America. Set sail on the 15th of July. So just 6 days after the murder. So it's a big challenge. What do you do now? There's no telephones, there's no telegrams. How are we going to solve this crime? Your suspect is sailing across to America. Now Richard Tanner, Scotland Yard detective, he's not going to be beaten. He went to Bow Street Magistrates Court and he got one of the very first extradition warrants. Then he took these witnesses, Mr. Death and Mr. Matthews and Sergeant George Clark. They went to Liverpool and they got on a steamship, much faster than the sailing ship, so they could reach America first. Now, very important they reach America first, because in 1864, if he reaches mainland America, he is gone forever.
Yeah,
no,
we're not talking about immigration. There's no record. He'll be off the ship and vanished
just
into the
vanished forever. That's it. He'd be gone forever. So very, very important they get there first. Steamship, it does a trick. They arrive 3 weeks before Franz Muller.
Amazing.
There is the middle of the American Civil War, so not the easiest time to arrive in America, looking for the assistance of the Americans. But Richard Tanner, very persuasive man, he gets the assistance of the New York police. And when the sailing ship Victoria comes into the harbour at New York, the officers and the witnesses go aboard. They identify Franz Muller. He gets arrested. Search him. He has a watch and chain on him, but he said, oh, this watch I bought 2 years ago. The officers, they check the serial number. It matches that of Mr. Briggs. So we know it's the right watch. And Mr. Death is, I would say, that is the same watch and chain. He has a top hat with him, same make as Mr. Briggs's hat, but it's shorter. It is examined later on by an expert who said, well, that's been adapted.
Oh, so he'd had it sort of cut down and
shortened down, yeah. They did say the work had been done by a tailor, not the work of a hat maker. Some tailor has done this.
Oh, I
and
see.
obviously Franz Muller is a tailor. He's had a lot of time on the ship, so he's spent his time adapting the hat. So he got extradited to this country, put on trial. His trial lasted 3 days. Took the jury just 15 minutes to find him guilty.
Wow.
Found guilty of murder, he was sentenced to death. Now, he was executed on the 14th of November, 1864. Well, bearing in mind the crime took place on the 9th of July. So that's literally 5 months between date of offence to date of execution, with chases across the Atlantic and back. Today's date, very unlikely to get anyone arrested and dealt with within 5 months. So very much in awe of people like Richard Tanner, and very inspirational stories to young detectives coming around the crime museum, because it is about looking beyond the obvious. Because very often you'll go up to a modern crime, there's no CCTV, no DNA, no fingerprints, and it's very easy to think, how am I ever going to solve that? But if you think about people like Richard Tanner thinking outside the box. The Tanner case, or the Franz Muller case, sorry.
Well, people know it as both, don't they? Because it's a
Mr.
huge celebrity. You know, it's in all the papers. There are songs. I think we've just accessioned some of the publicity material. I don't know what you'd call it. Sort of true crime aficionados of the sort of 1860s, isn't it? You know, you can see pictures of the detective, of the victim, of the murderer everywhere, and songs and stories, and it goes on the stage and everything, doesn't it? So,
they generally do. It's quite pivotal in relation to capital punishment. There were 50,000 people turned up to see Muller's execution. Not unusual. You normally got tens of thousands of people would turn up to an execution. On this occasion, they were pretty rowdy. And this did upset the public, the middle classes, who thought this isn't right. So we had a royal commission. 4 years later, executions were moved inside prison walls, so we no longer had public executions after 1868. The big thing about the crime at that time, murders did occur in London, but very rarely did they involve the upper classes.
Yeah.
And never did they occur in a first-class carriage. So this sent shockwaves across London. It was very important the case was solved, and solved very quickly, and Richard Tanner did exactly that. And
there is a lot of anxiety amongst the travelling public about it. I mean, there's a lot of fascination, but also fear. So you get these things called Muller windows that are being cut between, because we're talking, this is before corridor carriages, so you're essentially locked in the compartment with whoever happens to be in there until you get to the next station. So people are cutting these windows through between the different compartments, so you can look through, and you could presumably, I don't know, attract attention. At least someone could watch you being murdered and not do very much about it. But
obviously trains is more your thing than me, but my understanding was the isolation of being in the carriage caused a great deal of concern amongst the public. So you say the windows were installed, although if I understand correctly, and again correct me if I'm wrong, there was then that concern of lack of privacy, so the windows were taken out again. So you can't please everyone.
No, they don't last very long, is the thing, because actually it turns out people, especially in first class, don't like people peering into the next compartment and looking at what they might be up to or doing. I want to come back to Tanner, though, because you have the notebooks in the museum, don't you? It sounds like an amazing resource. And just this process of like going almost door to door. I mean, literally door to door in some cases. And I mean, apart from the distractingly named Mr. Death, this is about going to, is this pawn shops and jewelry, and just trying to think jewelers. About, you talk a bit more about like that process and what the notebooks might tell us.
The notebook covers all the arrests that Richard Tanner made during his career. So it covers lots of cases. Not the most detailed, but he would approach lots of people, and his team would approach lots of people. So he would have had a little bit of assistance. Not a massive team, but some people wouldn't want to help. So he would do whatever he could to try and find the link that's going to solve the case. The writing is fantastic. I've got a picture of it, which I'm more than happy to share with you. So hopefully you can put it on the podcast. And you can. I mean, we've got 2 exhibits in relation to this case in our collection.
I was going to say, because the other exhibit we have to talk about, because it's such a strange one for us in the 2020s, but we were just talking about earlier.
Yeah.
That this is quite a usual thing to do. So this is the death mask, isn't it?
Yeah, we have the death mask of Franz Muller. We have quite a few death masks in our collection. They link to a science called phrenology. Okay. In the 1800s, some very clever scientists felt that the lumps and bumps on your heads, position of your ears, size of your nose, the forehead, would dictate your personality. So they said, if you give us enough examples of a murderer, we will study those lumps and bumps, the position of the ears. We will find the common factor for a murderer. Had it been successful, may have changed policing. It was discredited. We've never used it as evidence in a trial.
You weren't out there measuring people's heads.
No, it would have been a very different world if we started to arrest people because of the position of their ears or the size of their nose.
It was a widely accepted scientific theory at the time, I think, wasn't it? It had a lot of proponents, at least, of people saying this phrenology is the way forward.
yeah, this was before fingerprints. So what else did we have to use? It's very difficult. They're looking for ways to help us solve crimes. No one even considered DNA at that stage. So I suppose the fact that you could see something obvious like the lump, the bump, the physical position of your ears or your nose, you could see how people might think it would work. And when fingerprints come along, if you'd said to someone back in the 1800s, we're going to identify you from a little drop of blood or some bodily fluids, it would have sounded ridiculous. But today's date, we use that very, very successfully.
I just think it's incredible that you can... The thinking about policing before the advent of even fingerprints, which we think of quite as an old-fashioned technology now that's been sort of superseded, I suppose, by, DNA perhaps, but... Even before, it must have been incredibly hard work for Tanner to do this. And I suppose we have to mention Muller maintains his innocence throughout the trial, doesn't he? And that he's just bought these things. He just happens to have accidentally bought the things from the shop.
Yeah, he did suggest he bought them from the docks on the 11th, which is a change in the story from saying I had to watch for 2 years. Yeah. His last words on the gallows, as the trapdoor opens, he is reported to have said to his German priest, "Yes, I did it." So there is that last-minute confession. The only person who could understand what he was saying was the priest. But yeah, throughout the trial, he did deny it. He put forward an alibi. This wasn't believed. I mean, the watch and chain are very damning evidence. The fact he had them so soon after the murder as well. I mean, when you look at the world today, people do expect more evidence because it exists. In the 1800s,
you're working with what you have.
Exactly that. So the jury would accept the fact there was no CCTV or DNA because we'd never heard of it.
Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about with the Briggs and the Muller? I mean, you've given us such an amazing overview of it.
No, I think that's about what we have on the Muller case. It's a great example of the Scotland Yard detectives of the 1800s and how they solved crimes without modern techniques.
And just an amazing snapshot of, I think, how people are feeling about the railway system, that it's new as well. I think one of the things that I'm taking away from this is your point that both of these things are in their infancy at the same time, policing and railways, and you're trying to sort of marry them together in this case. And then this amazing, the steam age that's arrived where you're able to race across the Atlantic and intercept the ship before this man escapes. So shall we jump? We were saying earlier, awkwardly, almost 100 years into the future. Yeah. And this is a case that people might know a little bit more about, or think they know a little bit more about. So this is the Great Train Robbery, isn't it?
The Great Train Robbery is probably one of the most famous crimes, most famous robberies. Again, I teach young detectives, most of them about 20 years old. So you talk about modern robberies, and like Brinks-Mat robbery, they've not heard of them sometimes, but the Great Train Robbery, everyone's heard of it. Took place on the 8th of August 1963. I nearly said 1863, going back to the earlier one, 1963. It is probably the most audacious robbery we've ever had. Definitely at that time, it was the crime of the decade. It was front page news for weeks. It obviously took a lot of planning, but they obviously had some inside information as well, because right from the start, how did they even know that the government was moving £2.5 million down from Glasgow to Euston every night? And I say that sum, £2.5 million, today's date, that's not a lot of money. But this is 1963.
There's a huge amount, and this is bank holiday.
Just after a bank holiday weekend, yeah. It's worth in the modern world about 67 million. Yeah. And the big difference between the Brinks-Mat robbery, Hatton Garden robbery, and this one is Brinks-Mat, they stole gold bullion. Yeah. So they had to smelt that down to convert it to cash. The train robbers were stealing ready used banknotes. So anything they could just go and use in a shop, anywhere, anytime. So on the face of it, it's worth more than the thing stole from Brinks-Mat. There was a lot of things. The robbery took place 3 days after a bank holiday, which meant the take-ins were higher. How did they know that? Obviously, it knows a bank holiday. But would you naturally work out the take-ins would be higher? Normally, they would use anti-bandit carriages. 3 of them were out of action that day. Had they been around, it would have taken them 20 minutes longer to get into the carriage.
So these were carriages that had sort of reinforced doors and bars on the windows to prevent literally this sort of occurrence. It's again very convenient that
was out
those
of
are
action.
out of action. So again, it points to some sort of
Inside
person.
information.
Yeah.
And I think most people thinking if you're moving that amount of money from Scotland to London every day or on the train, there is going to be some form of security, police, other security personnel. There was none. How would you know that? I think the train company felt, or the government felt, that who's going to be able to stop a speeding train? Why do we need guards on a train that you can't stop?
Yeah.
After the robbery, they changed their mind on that.
Do you want to talk us through like the sort of the basic outline of the robbery? Because I know some people watching this will know, but some people might not.
Okay.
Or might only know bits and pieces.
Yeah, it is very well known, but yeah, I'll gladly talk you through
Sorry,
it.
just to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are people who don't know about it because new people are coming along every day. But the robbery did take a lot of planning, and obviously looking at it from the police perspective, you look at the planning was involved because there's lots of things they would have to consider. Right, you know the money is going to come from Scotland to London, and you've got to find the right place to stop the train. So it's got to be close to a road so you can unload the money. And this has to be in a quiet location because if it's right next to a load of houses,
someone's going to rumble you.
Someone's going to be alerting the emergency service very quickly. They identified a bridge called Brigado Bridge in Buckinghamshire. I have an image of that if you want to see that. Yeah. It's a very nice, quiet location and very good for their purpose. When you look at train lines, there's generally about at least 4 tracks. You have to know which track there's going to be on. You try stopping the wrong track, and the train could go sailing past you. So they would have done a lot of research visits in the early hours of the morning to make sure they knew which track it was going to come on. You got that, and there's going to be 2.5 million, a lot of bags of money. So you're going to need a big gang. So we reckon in all there was about 16 people in the gang. Well, if you have 16 men hanging around this quiet country location, it's going to look suspicious. So what they did to overcome this, they disguised themselves as soldiers. They bought a truck, they bought Land Rovers, and they disguised them as military vehicles. So anyone seeing them naturally thought they were just soldiers on manoeuvres.
Yeah.
So a lot of thought went into that. They also worked out that as soon as the robbery was discovered, police would be on the scene. There would be roadblocks in place very quickly. The truck, the Land Rover, very good for a disguise, but not good at outrunning police vehicles. So they needed to be off the road, lying low, and they felt within about 30 minutes. So they looked for, and they acquired a place called Leverslade Farm. This was about 30 minutes drive away, big enough to house 16 men, and they had outhouses where they could hide the truck and the Land Rover. They stocked it full of food, drink, games, books, so they could amuse themselves for 2 weeks, lie low, and when the heat died down, they could just drive off with their ill-gotten gains. So a lot of planning. Biggest problem: how do you stop a speeding train?
Absolutely.
Because on the movies, they might blow the track up, boulders across the track. But if you do that, you're going to derail it. The emergency services are going to be very quickly on the scene.
Yeah.
And there's a fair chance you're going to destroy all the money anyway, so you'll have nothing left to steal. Very shrewdly, what they did is they put a glove in front of the green light, and then they illuminated the red light. So the train driver coming along the track, seeing the red light, had to stop. Yeah. Which is exactly what happened. Because of their very careful planning, everything went very smoothly. The train even arrived on time. 3 minutes past 3 on the morning of the 8th of August 1963. The plan with the glove worked. The train stopped. Jack Mills stops the train as the driver. His engineer, Dave Whitby, gets down to see what the problem is. Very quickly, he's overpowered by the robbers. The robbers then force their way onto the carriage. They beat Jack Mills around the head.
I think this is a really important thing to bring up. But we were talking about this. There's a lot of mythologizing and romanticizing about this robbery, but these guys are prepared for violence, are they? Like, they come ready for opposition, and they're going to overcome that opposition, aren't they?
Very definitely. Yeah. The carriage would have had about 70 mail workers sorting mail, because it was like a travelling sorting office. If 70 people are there and they resist, you could get sent on your way. So they were never going to do all that planning and come away empty-handed. So they had axes, they had koshes. Very quickly they beat Jack Mills around the head. He ended up with 17 stitches in his head.
He's never quite the same. I mean, neither driver or guard are the same again after this incident, are they? They're both. They die quite soon after.
Yeah, I mean, the victims are quite often forgotten in the stories. People talk about the robbers, but yeah, Jack Mills, he died 7 years later, never really fully recovered from his injuries. He was 58 at the time of the robbery, so he's died age 65. Yeah. The engineer, Dave Whitby, he was just 26 at the time of the robbery. He died 8 years later, 34 years of age.
Tragic at that young,
Yeah, he died of a heart attack, and he never really recovered from the robbery. So, and even the postal workers who were working in the sorting carriages, to imagine your train gets stopped in the middle of the night, it's dark, middle of nowhere, and then suddenly you've got masked men with balaclavas and gloves on, axes, smashing their way into the carriages. It would have been terrifying for everyone, all the victims involved in that. So you can't say it's a victimless crime. Everyone involved in that would have been petrified. Yeah. The robbers were a little bit incompetent. They had a driver who was supposed to drive the train along, because Brigida Bridge was about half a mile from the train signal. So they needed it driven half a mile. So they arranged a train driver who didn't know how to drive that kind of train.
Oh, this is interesting, right? Because this is some sort of he's like a retired trader, but he's not been trained on diesels and electric. So, because he's retired, he's of the steam age, right? So gets into cab, has no idea how to... This is where the sort of careful planning starts to come apart a bit, doesn't it?
So they're forced Jack Mills to drive the train, that extra... Well, they uncouple the high-value package carriages and the engine, and this is driven onto Brigida Bridge. And there, the team were very well together. They unload 126 mailbags full of cash. Took them about 20 minutes, and the operation is done. The train crew are told to lie low for 30 minutes, and someone will be there watching you to make sure they do. This is 1963. There's no mobile phones, so none of the crew can call for assistance on their mobiles. They can't text for help. The train side phone lines have all been cut.
Yeah.
The only way they can raise the alarm is to get on a train going in the opposite direction back to Cheddington Station and raise the alarm.
Yeah.
So it takes a while. The initial investigation is done by the Buckinghamshire Police, but very quickly they realise this is something bigger than they've ever dealt with before. So they decide to call in for the assistance of the Met, which is quite common. Yeah. County forces at that time would quite often look to the Metropolitan Police for assistance.
Particularly in presumably big cases, violent cases.
Unusual cases, yeah. And the Met decided Detective Chief Superintendent Tommy Butler and the flying squad were best to solve this case. So Tommy Butler and his team, they went up to take over the investigation. So they go to the crime scene. There's no forensic clues. They've worn gloves, they've worn balaclavas, so there's no forensic clues. But it doesn't mean there's no clues.
Okay. So
effective questioning by Tommy Butler of the train crew, they find out that the train crew have been told to lie low for 30 minutes. So Tommy also realises he thinks the robbers will be off the road in 30 minutes. So he circulates this to the press. The other thing gets told, obviously, by Dave Whitby is that there's Land Rover involved and there's a truck. So we let the press know that we are going to search every farmhouse, every outhouse in a 30-minute radius, looking for clues. And we asked the public to report anything suspicious. And to show that this isn't a victimless crime, we do put an image of Jack Mills front page of the news, so you can see how he's been beaten around the head. Yeah. The public are fantastic. We get 400 leads come forward. The public are always great, but every one of those leads has to be looked into. The name Leverslade Farm was amongst the leads, but you have to work your way through. Yeah. Helpful if it was the only one, we could have gone straight to it. The other thing that circulation did, it made the robbers panic. Now, all the films and the books, they try and portray the robbers as professional, well-planned, always wearing gloves, planned for everything.
So there are these guys in a farmhouse, and they're absolutely panicking at this point once they see all this coverage. Yeah. Suddenly
they know the flying squad, the police, could come through their door at any second. There they are, drinking, playing Monopoly. They had a Monopoly game, reading book, thinking they're going to lie low for 2 weeks and then go on and get on with their lives. Well, now, any second, the police could come through their door. They panicked, they fled. In the crime museum, we have hundreds of exhibits. They've left fingerprints on all sorts of things, including plates, the bath, there's a can of Party 7, the champagne. Monopoly board. Yeah, the Monopoly board is great. If you look at the box, they chose a box with a train on the front. They had to be very cocky. They chose, of all the boxes, they got one with a train on the front. They do try to suggest they were let down by someone else who was supposed to come and burn down the farm or clean the farm for them. There's 16 of them. They could clean their own farm. They could burn their own farm. They made a very poor attempt. They buried some of the mailbag bags and some balaclavas in the garden. They burnt some bits and pieces. Why not just burn the farm down or do a better job of cleaning it?
Yeah.
Clearly, they just panicked. They fled. It did take us 5 days to find the farm because we're working through the list. But as soon as we discovered it, we knew it was the hideout. Evidence everywhere. And it was very clear to Tommy Butler and his team this was going to be the way the crime was going to be solved. Very important that it was forensically examined as best we could. So it took 10 days to forensically examine that farm. Today's date, they're probably done a lot quicker. Modern techniques that have lifted exhibits quicker. So this meant, so it's 5 days to find the farm, 10 days to examine. So the robbers have got over 2 weeks head start on us. And then you have to start and identify whose fingerprints have been found. Well, today's date, we have got modern computer systems. 1963, all paper records. It would have taken ages to go through the paper records to see if they can identify whose fingerprints it were. Well, in the 1960s, the flying squad were very well known for their informants. So the flying squad would go in the underworld, speak to the informants to get suggestions who may have been involved in this robbery. We've got a book in the collection that was from the fingerprint branch, and it's got a list of names put forward by the flying squad. These include Bruce Reynolds, who was the main robber, Buster Edwards, Jimmy White. Listed names that was pretty accurate.
Yeah, and that's fascinating to me that you've got this, like, these leads are turning up almost exactly the right names that you want from them, from these informants, and it's helping you presumably filter down through this process of not just having to go through every fingerprint on the database, but comparing. And
yeah, I mean, the use of informants does get questioned sometimes, but all it really does is corroborate the fingerprints. It steers you in the right direction. Check the fingerprints against this person, that person. It's not suggesting they've done it, but if the fingerprints match, obviously it does.
And this is back to thinking back to what we said about the Briggs case, as well as working with the tools that you have at the time period that you have them as well. We're not talking about CCTV at this point, for example.
No
We're still
CCTV.
not talking about DNA either. So fingerprints, informants. This is what we're working with.
That's all we really had to work with, and it was very successful. That's what they had to work with. That's what they did. The shrewd robbers, Bruce Reynolds, Buster Edwards, Jimmy White, they fled the country very quickly. There was less. The remainder of the gang were arrested quite quickly. The first person to be arrested was a man called Roger Caudry. He was arrested down in Bournemouth. They work out roughly that every member of the gang got about £150,000. He decided he was going to hide his in a garage down in Bournemouth. So he drove to Bournemouth and he saw that there was a lady there renting out a garage. So he wanted to rent the garage, to put the car in with the money to hide it. Yep. She only wanted to rent a garage to a local person, which is her right. To convince her that he was trustworthy, to convince her he could pay the rent, he showed her he had so much cash he could pay 3 months' rent in advance. Well, the one thing you don't do after a great big robbery where a load of cash has been stolen is flash a lot of cash. So how naive was that? No. Sadly for him also, she was the widow of a police officer. So she was a shrewd lady. She contacted local police. They turn up. Him and a man called Billy Bowl, they get arrested. They're the first of the train robbers to get arrested. Within months, we had the trial. There was too many robbers to go in the court, so they converted the local town hall. The trial judge, a man called Sir Edmund Davis, was keen to make sure that it sent a real clear message that crime doesn't pay. And he too recognised the suffering of the victims. He said that anyone who's seen the trauma suffered by the poor train driver can see this is not a victimless crime. He was very, very traumatised. He gave them 30 years.
It's quite excessive sentence at the time, would you say? Or
a lot of people felt so, and they were reduced on appeal. Okay. It took us another 3 years to arrest Buster Edwards and Jimmy White, so they weren't arrested until 1966. Bruce Reynolds, who was the leader of the gang, he was on the run until 1968. Amazing. Now, in that time, he'd been to France, Germany, Canada, America. Finally arrested, living under a false name in Torquay. Now, bearing in mind he had 150. It's very nice.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind he had £150,000 to start with, he had 6,900 when arrested. So most of that money has been spent trying to avoid capture. So didn't actually do him that much good getting that amount of money. That said, we didn't recover a lot of money, but only £400,000 was recovered. So we got the 6,900 from Bruce Reynolds. There was the money from Roger Caudry and Billy Bowles. There was about, I think it was about £40,000 left in a phone box in Southwark, South East London. Obviously, someone felt we were getting very close and just abandoned the money. So a lot of money didn't get recovered, but they all got lengthy terms of imprisonment. Probably the most famous of the robbers is a man called Ronnie Biggs.
Yeah.
But Ronnie Biggs, he wasn't famous for the robbery.
It's quite a peripheral
Yeah.
character when you look into the details of it, isn't it? And my understanding, he's the one who finds the train driver. Is
Yeah, he has a very
who's
minor
not a very
role.
not even a very useful train driver. So
He didn't do that very well either.
No.
Ronnie Biggs is the most famous of the train robbers, but he's only really famous for escaping from Wandsworth Prison.
Yeah.
His role in the Great Train Robbery was very minimal. When he escaped from prison, he went to France, Germany, and the Met, as we do, we circulate images of what he thought he might look like, thinking he's changed his appearance slightly, but by that time he had plastic surgery. He went down to Australia and then on to Brazil.
And there's no extradition treaty with Brazil.
There's not, so that's right.
Not
so
at this point.
No,
No.
I mean, Jack Slipper, who was the investigating officer who was trying to track down Ronnie Biggs, discovers he's in Brazil. So he thought, being very persuasive, he would go to Brazil to try and persuade him to come back. Not surprisingly, Ronnie Biggs.
Not keen.
Not keen. I think Jack Slipper probably got a nice suntan.
Oh, okay.
The situation changed, and I think it was about 1997. England and Brazil ratified an extradition treaty. Unfortunately for us at that stage, Ronnie Biggs now had a son, which meant he couldn't be extradited. 2001, his health started to deteriorate, so he actually wrote a letter to Scotland Yard saying, I want to come back. His biggest problem, he couldn't get a passport, so he needed Scotland Yard to assist him getting a passport. The letter he wrote to confirm it was the genuine letter from Ronnie Biggs, he put his thumbprint on it. So we have a copy of that letter in the museum to prove it was him. He came back, served about 8 years, released in 2009, and died a few years later.
I mean, it's sort of a strange end to the crime, isn't it? You know, as you say, when we were just talking, they come away with this money, but they're never really. I mean, you know, the TV dramas they make about it, you know, so you emphasise them sort of living a high life with this, but a lot of they're constantly looking over their shoulder,
Exactly that.
anxious about, you know, dropping cash here, there, and everywhere, and they're sort of panicked. So it's quite a strange end to the crime, I suppose, isn't it?
And
in
that's
that way.
credit to Tommy Butler and his team to make sure that the criminals knew that we're always going to be looking for them, so they couldn't relax and enjoy the money. The other sad anecdote really was Tommy Butler. He retired shortly after 1968 and again passed away in 1970. So only enjoyed 2 years of his retirement. So it's very, very, very sad.
Yeah, no, that is sad. And I suppose what that leads me on to is thinking about that sort of next wave of policing. That, you know, you're involved in training young officers now. What's different now to, you know, if we were investigating railway crime now, what has changed since the 60s, and where do groups like the Met and the British Transport Police fit into that sort of, you know, 2026 picture of things?
The British Transport Police has evolved massively. From 1963, definitely was beyond their capabilities. But today's fine force got capability of dealing just about everything on the railways, and have trained in just about everything. A very, very different world. And policing techniques, they're always evolving, and it's great for me. In the museum, I still learn new cases. For me, today's news is tomorrow's history. So every time there's a new case, I speak to the investigating officers, we get new exhibits. If I don't get them at the time, there's a fair chance they will get in the property store, and it'll be very difficult to get them out. But it's very important for me also to speak to the modern investigating officer to find out about these new techniques and the issues they faced and how they were overcome, because we can pass that knowledge on to the new officers, and it's recorded for future curators looking back on how cases were solved, because one of the biggest challenge I had was the lack of records from the early days.
Of course,
As much as they would do some notes or they would keep exhibits, they felt that was enough for them. So today's day, I do try to record interviews with investigating officers and think like a detective. What would I need to know? What would young detectives coming around the museums? There's some fantastic, I mean, you've only got to look at things like Hatton Garden.
Of course, yeah.
Some experienced robbers who had been arrested many, many times. And in places there's a thing called disclosure. So we let the criminals know the evidence all against them. So this group of robbers, as they generally do, they sit down, they pull their knowledge about police investigations, and they think, right, we know more than the police, so we're going to commit the perfect crime, retire happy and rich. Well, the great thing about my collection, I've got some, I don't like to call them good criminals in the museum, but some audacious criminals. But if they're in the museum, the crime museum, it's because they've been caught. We only get the exhibits after they've been arrested and convicted. So no matter how good they are, if they're in the museum, they were good, we were better.
I think that's a great note to end that on, isn't it? So, I know that there are going to be people watching and listening to this desperate to come to the museum. I think we need to reiterate that it is a closed museum for training purposes, but there are other museums that the public can go to engage with this theme, aren't there?
Yeah, the Crime Museum is a police training museum. It is in Scotland Yard. It's even difficult to get into Scotland Yard, let alone the museum. But we have a wonderful sister museum. It's the Police Museum. It is based at Marlow House in Sidcup. Hopefully we can put some sort of link on the podcast.
Absolutely.
To show you how to visit. Up until May 2026, because I'm not sure when this is going to be aired, they actually did an exhibition for the whole year about the Crime Museum. Because the Crime Museum was set up in 1875, so 2025 was our 150th anniversary.
Yeah.
So celebrate that fact. The Police Museum was an exhibition about the Crime Museum. Had you seen this podcast before May 2026, you could have gone to the Police Museum and seen Franz Muller's death mask. You could have seen exhibits from the Great Train Robbery. Saying that, there's a fair chance after the next exhibition is going to be about developments in forensics.
Oh, amazing.
So there's a fair chance those two cases will still feature.
Because these are important cases. I mean, we've pulled them out partly because of this railway connection, and they are important. We've talked about, developments in fear of the railways in the 1860s, and then developments about security in the 1960s. But these are also important cases for the police in terms of learning and developing, aren't they?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the criminals are always there. Like I say, they seem to think they're always going to commit. They never think they're going to get caught. 1960, Fingerprint Branch was set up in 1901. So fingerprints have been around for 62 years, and the robbers were obviously very aware of that, wore gloves all around the crime scene. But it's them moving on to the next stage. Likewise with the Hatton Garden robbers, very cautious of what they did at the crime scene, but they still got caught.
But I think that's a really nice note to leave it on. Thank you, Paul, for coming in and sharing those stories. And I think we're going to put links in the description below for anyone who wants to follow up on those.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. What a fantastic setting. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. I found that fascinating, and I hope you did too. If you've got comments or ideas for other podcasts, please leave them below, and do consider giving us a like and a subscribe as we go forward. Thank you.